So as I'm sure you know, one of Matt's challenges to the other VEDSies this year was to do a top 5 list. To comment on his video and he would pick a topic and then we'd make a top 5. Unsurprisingly, he picked mythology for me. So today we're going to go over my top 5 favorite myths. This video is unscripted, so if I go off on tangents, you'll know why. Also, this list, like many top lists, is pretty fluid. My favorites depend on what I'm studying or what I'm currently reading, but at least a couple of these are universally always on the list. So without further ado, let's talk about number 5. There's a reason I started this month out with the Norse creation myth. I absolutely love it. When you're starting off reading myths, it's pretty common that you start with the creation myth. The beginning's a pretty good place to start, I've heard. And so it's not surprising that I've read a lot of creation myths in the past, but this was the first one where I came across this concept of making the universe out of a body. It's not the only one to do this by any means, but it is the first I've come across, and it's a really cool concept. That paired with the dynamic description in the Prose Edda make this a really awesome myth, and my favorite creation myth, or at least as of now. I'm working on a video about the Navajo creation myth, so it might overtake it. Number 4. My number 4 pick is less known. It's the story of Iphigenia, the daughter of Agamemnon, who led the Trojan War. It's mainly told in Euripides' play Iphigenia Aulos, and it's actually the first play I read for my classical mythology class freshman year, so it has a special place in my heart. It actually captured my imagination so much that I adapted it into a short screenplay. That's honestly not very good. The story is basically the Greek forces are stuck not being able to sail to Troy to actually start the war. The only way that Agamemnon can make the gods favor him is by sacrificing his daughter. And so the play plays with this idea. It has a lot of scenes between Agamemnon, Iphigenia, his wife, his brother, various members of council. And it's actually incomplete, which I think adds to this nice ambiguity to it. There is a happy ending, but that isn't probably the original ending, so we don't really know what Euripides' deal was. It also adds some interesting backstory to the Trojan War that goes beyond just Helen being kidnapped. Number 3. So it shouldn't come as a surprise to you guys that most of my favorite myths also were the foundations for videos this year. But this is one that actually I didn't know about till I started researching one of my videos. My knowledge of Maui was limited before I actually started on the video. One of the reasons I chose that to be one of the first videos I made was because I wanted to learn more about Maui. And learn I did, and not just learn, but also discover a really beautiful and a really tragic myth. I talked in that video how it really fits with his character, this idea of Maui is a figure of great success, but also great failure. So it makes sense that when he's going after his greatest reward, that he would face his greatest failure, and that there wouldn't be any success after that. It's a really poetic, kind of human way to end the story of this really great hero, and I like it. Maui is often considered the Polynesian Hercules, but Hercules, when he dies, becomes a god. When Maui dies, he dies. And I don't know, I think that's cool. Or sad. It's sad cool. School. School's already a thing. This is ridiculous. Number 2. Okay, so I know you guys are probably inundated with the mainstream narrative that Polyphemus is just a barbaric cannibal. But let me tell you a story that might change your mind. See, Polyphemus is a goat shepherd. He just chills out. He likes goat cheese and milk and just likes hanging out on his island. It's pretty cool until a bunch of people show up and stab him in the eye. And one of the things he does pre-blinding is he tries to woo a sea nymph named Galatea with some dank poetry. He of course fails at this. This is a story that is comedic in nature. The idea of Polyphemus, this big brute of mythology, trying to woo a symbol of beauty like a sea nymph with poetry is comedic to the Greeks. And the poetry itself is not exactly of the muses. But, and this might be a little anachronistic, I find it to be a kind of charming story, a little sweet, kind of innocent. I don't know, I've always enjoyed Polyphemus as a character and kind of felt like he's kind of one note in a lot of people's minds. So to have a second myth that I can point to and be like, yo, he's not all just let me rip Odysseus's crewmates apart. He's also, hey there. If we're being truly anachronistic, it could also be portrayed as really creepy, but you know what? The beauty of anachronism is I get to choose how I see the myth. I like this myth so much that it's my favorite subject of Roman art, being this wall painting from Pompeii. You do get him attacking Odysseus' ship up at the top, but for the most part the focus is on him reading his poetry, and there are his goats and there's Galatea on her creepy dolphin. Romans thought dolphins were creepy, and you know, they were kind of right. I like this image and this myth so much that, as you may have noticed, this is the title image for Mythology Month. So take that, mainstream mythology media. Polyphemus is a good guy now. Hashtag justice for Poly. And finally, number 1. As a kid, it might not surprise you to learn that I liked mythology, especially Egyptian mythology, but as time went on, my mythology kind of went into the back of my mind. I've forgotten most of it, and I kind of lost interest. That was until I went to the library and picked up Battle of the Labyrinth by Rick Riordan. It's the 4th in the Percy Jackson series, and, you know, probably not the best starting point, but it really caught my attention. And a couple weeks later, I went to a curriculum fair and got a book called Men and Gods by Rex Warner. I actually have that. Let me go get it. It's a super beat up library copy, but I absolutely adore it. These are the 2 books that got me back into mythology, and I'm so happy. But it might not surprise you to learn that since this focuses on the labyrinth, one of the myths I was most drawn to when reading this book was about Theseus. And the story of Theseus and the Minotaur is my favorite myth. I think that it goes beyond just that connection to Battle of the Labyrinth, though. I think that the whole thing comes together to make a really interesting narrative. You've got a progression, you've got, you know, rising conflict and falling action. It plays off really well. There's a reason I think that it, more than any other myth, has kind of ancestors in modern day storytelling, like I talked about in my Hunger Games and Theseus video. It's because it's just a really compelling story. It's also different from a lot of Greek myths. Theseus's goal is really strongly motivated, and the imagery of the labyrinth and the Minotaur is really evocative. I like the stuff that comes before and after in Theseus's life, especially him lifting up and getting the sword under the stone. That's all pretty cool. But I think the heart of his story is really focused in that Minotaur myth. It's when we both see him at his best, sacrificing himself to save his people, and at his worst, when he abandons Ariadne. It's a really, in my opinion, it's a really cool myth, and by far my favorite. You know, I would have loved to put Polyphemus and Galatea at number 2 just for the joke of it, and because I do really like that myth, but nothing can beat out Theseus. In fact, after I get done with this video, I'm probably going to read back through that section of this book because I'm just a really big fan. So those are my top 5 favorite myths. Please tell me what your favorite myth is down in the comments, and if any of these myths catch your fancy and I haven't already done a video on them and you want me to, let me know, and I'll try to squeeze it in. I love talking about these myths, so I'd be happy to. I'll see you tomorrow, VEDS. May our stories outlive us all. Justice for Polly!